Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alexey, and today I have a special guest, Josh Schroeder. Josh Schroeder is a producer, mixing and master engineer who has been working with such great metal bands as Lorna Shore, Dayseeker, The Plot in You, Signs of the Swarm, and many more. Also, Mr. Schroeder has wonderful videos and courses on Nail the Mix, the best online community on recording, mixing and mastering metal music. So, for instance, if you want to learn from Mr. Josh Schroeder on mixing Lorna Shore, Signs of the Swarm, The Plot in You, and other metal bands, you can check out his mixing courses and videos on Nail the Mix. The link will be in the info box of this video. It's a huge honor to have you on my YouTube channel today, Mr. Josh Schroeder. And let's start our interview. How you became a sound engineer?
How I became a sound engineer, for me, it was just out of practicality. I never had any much money growing up, and the idea of going to a studio was just out of the question. Not any studio, like even the cheapest possible studio, out of the question. So for me, it was just about borrowing gear from friends, band members, just to try and put a demos together. So it was just a matter of practicality. Never meant to become a sound engineer. It was just, out of necessity.
How you got into mixing metal?
Well, I was in metal bands. So the first band that I was in a bunch of just fun jam around with friends type bands. And I was in a band where I grew up in Canada. And that was the first band where I felt like, oh, there's some ambition here. We might actually be semi-serious about doing something. So that was playing metal, and I was playing guitar in that band. And I wrote a lot of the songs, and I really enjoyed it. I just enjoyed playing metal live. There was something, I played in some rock bands and stuff, but cover bands and things like that. But something about playing metal live was always the most fun to me. It had the highest energy. It was just super aggressive. So it was just a natural fit that I ended up mixing metal, because there's a lot of problems to solve in a metal mix. There's a lot of density and aggression. So I just liked the challenge of it. And that was just it. I just naturally kind of fell into it, again, out of practicality.
How you started working with Lorna Shore?
That was something where I'm trying to think if their old manager, if we had done anything else in the past. I don't remember. I know they were aware of the work that I had done with, I think they're fans of Varials. If I'm not, I think that was the case. They really liked the Varials Pain Again album, and Pain Remains, not too far of a distance in naming. So I think that's a little obvious. There's a new song in the new album called In Darkness. They're fans of Varials. They're friends. It's one of those things. It's a bit of a nod, a bit of a rib kind of a thing. So they were aware of my work with Varials, but again, you listen to Varials and you don't think, oh, that sounds like Lorna Shore. I think they just liked the mix and the production of it. And they were wondering, well, can this guy also do more traditional metal stuff with blast beats and fast double bass? Because that's just not Varials style. And I think they came across some of my older albums. I think The Burial was one in particular, I think, that we talked about in the past. I think the album, which one was it? In the Taking of Flesh. Great album, super underrated album that I did. Oh, this is probably back in 2014, maybe 2013. I'm trying to think of when I did this record. Great band. Elisha, who was the primary songwriter in that band, he now plays for Miss May I. Great guy, phenomenal guitarist, one of the best guitarists I've ever worked with. And I think the Lorna Shore came across this album and they're like, okay, this guy knows how to do not only breakdowns and heavy stuff, but he can also do technical metal as well.
How do you do post-production for metal bands? And in this case, do you use any production packs, or do you create your own sounds? And if you create your own sounds, how do you create your own sounds?
It's a bit of both. Sometimes out of, like, if I'm doing a string section for Lorna Shore, for example, I just use like Native Instruments stuff. Maybe one day I'll hire out an entire orchestra and make my own sample pack. That's just too expensive, too time consuming. I'm just not really interested in doing something right now. So I use a lot of that stuff, soundscape stuff from, I just like the Native Instrument stuff because I have the keyboard and there's like dummy mode for different like chord sets and stuff. It's easy for me, and because I'm okay at playing piano. I'm very much a novice. So having a keyboard that allows me to play more complex chords very easily is great. So that's why I like the Native Instrument stuff. I'm not endorsed by them. I just like it. That's what I choose to use. There's plenty of other stuff. Andrew, I know, uses a whole suite of other things. He uses like East-West stuff. There's a million other things. But in terms of sample creation, yeah, I'll do that I'll make a lot of my own drum sounds and samples. I try, if the goal is to do live drums, which it always is with Lorna Shore, for example, then I will do as much live drums as possible. And sometimes, like Austin and I went out to a parking garage for the latest album for Everblack, and I was like, let's go out there and make some crazy sounding snare bombs. And I just had him brought his snare out to the parking garage late at night, and we just made samples that way. I'll do other samples. When it comes to doing live drums, and I'm not a snob when it comes to doing live drums, I'll do an album of programmed drums. That's fine. The thing that you realize the longer you're in this industry is you have all these lofty hopes and dreams as a young engineer that we're going to do live drums for everything. And just like the reality is, when you're dealing with a lot of touring bands, a lot of tight schedules and band member changes, and the reality of life comes into play with making a record, you have to be able to pivot. So I've learned to embrace programmed drums. I used to be a punk snob and like, anybody that uses programmed drums, they're not making real records. I've long since gotten over that because, again, sometimes I've worked with bands who they fired their drummer 2 weeks before studio time. So we don't have time to find another drummer, a session drummer, to learn drums. That's just out of the time. We have this window to work with. So, okay, so now you need to figure out how to make programmed drums sound good. Now, when I first started recording bands, I did a lot of programmed drums simply because I didn't have gear. And I tried single mic setups, and I would augment that. I would do a bunch of different things. But as a drummer, I've learned to just be able to program drums. When I first started out, I had a single mic, and I would record the drummer's playthrough and just program it all by ear, just from listening to a single mic. And again, it sounds more impressive if you don't play drums. If you play drums, it's not too crazy of a thing. So I would do that, and I would make some samples sometimes, but yeah, I do a combination impacts and stuff. I'll find some like sine waves and bend them a certain way. I have this notorious kind of like guitar kind of demolishing sound that I'll use on breakdowns, which is like a key. It's like this weird combination of keyboards and amps that I've kind of put together that I've never seen anyone else do. So I have a few so sometimes I'll make samples completely from scratch. Sometimes I'll use something pre-made, and sometimes it's a combination of two different things. I'll make some impacts and some bumpers, as I like to call them. In a band, again, to go back to Lorna again, their music is very dense. It's a lot of blasting. It's a lot of things going on. So for me as a listener, I'm like, I don't know where bar one starts. I don't know where this next riff starts, because it's all just as many notes as possible. So I need little impacts along the way to let you know, here's the start of this next bar. Here's the start of this next thing. And that's an idea that I got and just made it more ridiculous. Andy Wallace would do stuff like that. You can listen to Smells Like Teen Spirit. And to me, I don't know if it's Dave Grohl's playing. It sounds more like a mixing bump that he does on the start of each bar in those riffs. So there's more subtle things, but again, when you're dealing with deathcore, it's a little bit more over the top with some of the bands. Like Signs of the Swarm is another one where we just go as over the top as possible with like impacts and stuff like that. So again, I'll find myself reaching for some pre-made things, or if it doesn't quite fit the sound, and sometimes we'll just make sounds out of funny stuff. I do a lot of ripping sounds from like YouTube. This goes back decades. I just like finding weird inside jokes. For example, on the last Signs of the Swarm record, some of the guys are big Gears of War fans, and I ended up sampling the sound of a shotgun from Gears of War to layer in with the snare, just because we thought it was funny. It sounded cool, but then it's also unique to that band. And we'll do a lot of stuff like the new Lorna Shore record. There's a few samples of like bald eagles, because we'll have some, there's some inside jokes about just overt, patriotism and things like that. And we have a good time with it. But then it was like, oh, let's put a bald eagle here because this sounds so American. And it's there like very, very quietly. And it's just like something you'll rip from YouTube or something. So I'm always looking for fun ways to layer in inside jokes that the band will have, or the band and I will have, to put into the record. It just makes it different because another band's going to come in with a whole new set of people, and they have a whole new set of inside jokes or ideas and stuff. So I'm always trying to figure out ways to like make things custom to each band I work with. Again, within a set frame of time. Ideally, you'd make custom sounds for every band, all the sounds. You just don't have time for that. Given your own time, given the band's time, given the touring schedules, and we got to do a video here, and then we got to do this tour here, so we have X amount of days to write the album. So I'm always trying to figure out creative ways to work within the time constraints to make the albums as custom as possible, and it looks very different album to album and band to band.
What tips can you give on recording drums for metal bands like Lorna Shore?
I'll give you two different answers. The one is like the more obvious answer for maybe the casual listener, but it's one of those things. When you record live drums, the number one thing that a lot of young engineers don't really maybe realize is how important a good drummer is to the recording of live drums. It's essential. It's essential. You can have the most shot gear. You can come in with a Focusrite, with 2 channels, put up 2 mics on a phenomenal drummer. You'll get something really cool that's absolutely workable. But the thing with young engineers is that it's hard to explain something to somebody because it's the thing that you don't know. You don't know because you've never recorded a good drummer, so you don't know how much of a big difference it does make. You'll listen to, let's say you go to Nail the Mix and you download drum files. You're like, oh, wow, these sound so good. It must be a great engineer. Yes, that's true for a lot of the times, but also like the drummer makes such a big part of it. And also, so you get a good drummer, number one, easy, right? Like, oh yeah, just find a good drummer. I'm lucky enough that I've worked hard enough to attract good drummers. That was something that I made a conscious decision working early on. If I can get a good drum tone, everything else will be easy. Easy. So if I can, if you can make somewhere between 8 and 16 mics work together to make a cohesive drum sound, then studio work everything else will be easier than that. So get good at that. But anyhow, so you get a good drummer, but also a good arrangement is another one too. You have to, when you're dealing with a lot of compressors and EQs and all of these technical engineering things, what is the composition? Is the composition of what you're playing, is it fighting the things that will make it sound good? I'm trying to think of a better way to explain that. It's just writing good music. It's one of those things where a lot of good engineers and producers will tell you the best songs kind of mix themselves to a certain degree. They are just arranged in such a way where it's obvious what to do. When you work with bands that are still trying to find their voice, still trying to figure out how to properly play drums and guitars, it's going to be messy. Even something as simple as tuning a guitar. I'll sometimes work with some bands where I'm like, oh, you're still pretty green. Like, you know roughly how to tune a guitar, but not really tune a guitar, not really learn how to intonate the guitar properly. Like, most people hear a slight wobble on a guitar. I'm talking very faint, and you'll think, oh, it's the guitar tone. It's like, no. The guitar is simply slightly out of tune. Same thing with drums. You'll hit a drum and be like, oh, the drum sounds fine. And I'm thinking to myself, no, it sounds like crap. It's not perfectly tuned. You're not listening. You're trying to tune it to, let's say, a note that you're using your phone app to try and find. I'm like, that's fine and dandy, but this drum doesn't want to be tuned to that note. You have to be aware of the drums you're using. So that's another big important ingredient with doing live drums. Do you have a nice drum kit? Most of the drummers I work with, they'll have something nice. I keep some nice drum kits here. That was something I was keen to invest in early on. And I've also been lucky enough to work with some people like Max Portnoy, who have a great relationship with Tallah drums. So he, as just the kindness out of his heart, hooked me up with a deal with Tallah to get like a nice Babinga kit for the studio. That's what we've been using on the last couple of Lorna Shore records. So that was wonderful. And that is one of those things I look back to myself, boy, I could have used that when I was younger. That's the irony and the funny thing about being, successful in the music world. When you could really use the endorsements, you have nothing to show for it, and you'll never get, it's expensive. And then the better you get at it, and all of a sudden people start handing you free stuff. So it's very nice. And I feel very, very blessed to have those relationships and have a really nice drum kit to work with. So having a really nice Tallah kit to record helps out tremendously. So there's that. Great drummer, a really nice kit, good arrangements. And that's something, again, going back to the arrangements thing, I learned early on. When I first started, it was just like, oh, you can record a demo, record my friend's band. Okay, sure. Yeah, pay me $50. We'll do a song, whatever. And I learned pretty quickly, you work with somebody, let's say, that's better than you are as a musician, and you learn right away. It's like, why is this so much easier to record? Well, they're better musicians. The songs are better written. So I learned pretty quickly early on, just recording even friends who were better than me, that I need to focus more on my arrangement. When a band comes in with a shitty song, I need to say, hey, can we maybe this vocal's trying to do one thing and this lead's trying to do something else. We need to pick one or the other. Either you simplify the vocal or you simplify the lead. And we need to have, and I early on, I was like, I need to get good at having this awkward conversation with people. So you start getting in the ring in terms of arrangements early on and helping bands out, because number one, it helps the song to be better, but it also helps you as an engineer later on. Since I do everything from engineering to mixing to mastering, it's all about the song. At the end of the day, I can wear a million different hats, and people who also take on this role, it's very easy to get confused along the way, and you start thinking, oh, what compressor, what mic am I using? That's all fine and dandy, and it's good to know that stuff. But at the end of the day, it is the song itself that is going to dictate how good that master sounds. So, arrangements. Austin and I, for example, with drums, and Bobby and I with Signs of the Swarm, and really, any band I work with Varials, with Sean, we'll go over all the drum parts, and I like to let the drummer do their own thing. It's their instrument, it's their voice. Unless I hear something that's really obviously creating a problem, I'm not going to say, hey, you should do this or you should do that. I want Sean to sound like Sean. I want Austin to sound like Austin. I want Bobby to sound like Bobby. If I feel like I have something to say, some kind of input, I'll say, hey, let's maybe change this up because this is stepping on a vocal, or this is stepping on a guitar part, or this is stepping on production, or this is making the chorus not quite feel as big. Maybe you should simplify it. Just simple stuff like that. So all of those things will help bring drums to sound better I'm talking from mostly a philosophical standpoint, right? These are all overarching things. So to get into the technical side of things, mics are important. Having, for me, it's about, I love the sound of Neve 1073s. So I was like, okay, I don't want to fuck around with cheap preamps. I'm just going to use my PreSonus until I have enough money to buy a Neve. I don't want something in the middle. I want to use this until I can afford something right. And I'm going to get the thing so that way I can buy it and be done with it. And I don't have to wonder, well, if I would have got the knockoff, I'm just going to get a Neve. So I use Neves for drums or APIs. I like the sound of APIs and cymbals. They do a great job, especially with hi-hats, overheads. I love what they do to something with the saturation and the harmonics. I remember recording drums on my PreSonus interface back in the day, and the cymbals are always so harsh. There's always these whistling frequencies, and it could be a situation of shitty cymbals, but there's something about those, some nice preamps that really kind of tame those frequencies and make it easier to deal with. So there's that. The other technical side of recording drums, yeah, nice mics. I like Audix mics on toms simply because of the smaller form factor. You can get into 421s, and those are really good too. But I like the Audix mics. They can fit between a tom and a cymbal pretty nicely, whereas the 421's a little awkward. And so that's just my personal decision. I saw Machine use them on a Suicide Silence album one time, and I'm like, if it's good enough for this album, you know what I mean? I have no excuses then. You know, then it's something on my end. If I can't make these mics sound good, there's some other factor. The other thing is, you know, a well-treated room, you know what I mean? Like, I like recording in a small, tight, controlled room. So that way, if we're doing blasts, I can tighten things up real close. If we did that in a big, large room, it would just be a mess. It would just be sound bouncing off of everything. So for most of the bands I record, it just makes sense in a small room. We've been doing these live King records recently. King's been on a psychotic tear, as they always are. The latest craze is they're doing 3 live albums this year. I've already mixed 2 of them, and we've been doing them. We didn't do them here for the primary reason is they wanted to do these live records in front of an audience of 50 fans. They would sell tickets to record the album in front of fans, which is a great idea. It's really cool. But I don't have the room here, the parking space for like 50 people. So they ended up booking time at Pearl Sound in Detroit. And the thing I realized, I was like, oh yeah, we're going to record at this legendary live space. This is going to be great. And the thing I realized pretty quickly is with a band like that, even, which, I mean, they're way simpler than Lorna Shore in terms of like playing style and density. There's just the amount of like slapback in the room is just really not conducive unless you're playing simple rock stuff. And in those passages, it sounds good. But anytime John Paul is doing something a little more complex, I'm just hearing so much like slapback, you know, and it's just, it reinforced my decision. It felt good. It's like, yeah, you're doing the right thing, homie. Keep those rooms dead so that you can have control. That's just the way I like to mix. And if someone can make, plenty of other engineers have made big, lively rooms sound good for something more dense than that. And they just have more experience with it than I do. But for my style, I like a controlled room. I like to, because I think I just like compressing the shit out of things sometimes. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But sometimes I'll have a snare track and I'm just like, man, I just love the way that rings. It has a certain sound about it. So let's really like, you know, compress the shit out of it to bring some overtones out. And if it was in a big lively room, I would get so many slapback sounds and so much just junk that I don't want into that snare mic. So yeah, so for the snare mic, what am I using? It's a Beta 57, I want to say. I like that. It has a little bit more isolation, I feel, than a 57. I could be talking on my ass, but I think other people have also said the same thing. It's nice. It works well. So for Lorna, to get back to those specific questions about Oblivion and Unbreakable, I mean, the whole album was recorded the same way. So the rest of the songs, when they finally come out, you'll hear a consistency across the rest of them. We tried, every time I do a Lorna record, I try to do something different. When we did Immortal, we did drums like you normally would do with triggers and things. And then we did the EP and I wanted it to sound different. So I went through a frustrating process of trying to change the sound. And then on Pain Remains, I'm like, okay, I want to do like, it's like, Austin, have you ever done like shells and cymbals separate? And he's like, oh God. He's like, I think he said he did it a long time ago with somebody else, some other engineer. He said it was a nightmare. I said, okay, was this person a drummer? And they're like, and Austin's like, no. It's like, yeah, that's the problem. Because if you try to do that technique with somebody that's not a drummer, it's hard to organize the session in such a way where it feels natural, because it's such an unnatural process doing just cymbals and then doing just shells separately. So again, we put both of our drummer brains together. I have a whole system of getting a screen in front of him so he can sight read everything he needs to play off of a MIDI map. And so he can see, kind of like Guitar Hero, right? Or like Rock Band. You can see exactly what you need to play, and we take it in small chunks. And that's the other thing too. We take these songs in such small chunks, 4 bars at a time or 8 bars, sometimes just 1 or 2 bars at a time to get a fill just right. And a lot of young engineers, inexperienced people, they'll go into be like, I got to play the whole song in one take. I'm like, yeah, but it won't be tight. You know what I mean? There's not And the thing, a lot of people hear this new Lorna Shore stuff and think there's a ton of edits. There's really not a lot of editing going on. The editing happens on how we break the song down into small chunks. I'll have Austin play a fill 8, 10, 12 times in a row, just the fill, as hard as you can. Here we go. Take 5 seconds break. Another time, just to really get as much aggression as possible. If you go from a blast, like he often does, a blast into a fill, into another blast, into some crazy pattern, it's hard to keep up that kind of stamina that we want to hear on a record, that over the top aggression. So breaking it into small little chunks like that allows you to play that 20% harder, that really brings out the extra attack on the drums. And again, separating cymbals from shells allows me to compress and treat the shells different than I would if it was a full live kit. If I'm doing a full live kit, I'm going to be gating or editing out tom mics and things like that. But if we do it separate, I can get a little bit more shell from the overheads. I can get a lot more shell from the room mics and things like that. Even in a small room, it's pretty amazing how much you can do with some room mics when you separate it out that way. So there's a lot of planning and prep work that goes into that style, because you can't just take a band that's used to jamming full band and then expect the drummer to do shells and cymbals. You have to do a lot of prep work. You got to do a lot of preparation in your session. You have to have a system that makes it comfortable for your drummer and all that kind of stuff. You have to understand the language of the person trying to, use this weird ass technique to make the drum sound that way. But yeah, we did it on Pain Remains. We really liked the result of it. It was a great way to get separation of like ride cymbals and like little splashes, and because he does so much little detail, and it's very easy for that to get lost. So that worked well in Pain Remains, and we decided to do the same technique for the new one. I'd say the only thing we really changed, we used the same drum kit. He's got some new cymbals. He's got a nice deal with Meinl. Beautiful. I mean, it's great. We have like some of the best cymbals in the world to choose from. So that's awesome. The snare, we changed out the snare. We used the Danny Carey custom snare, the Sonar one for Pain Remains, and that poor thing has been through the ringer. So by the time we did this new one, the thing was just shot. And but we got a bell brass, which is kind of the holy grail of snares. So that was a snare I really was looking forward to. We put like copper hoops on it, so the thing weighed about 50 pounds by the time we were done with it. So that was the change up. And there's I'm trying to think of anything else drum wise that I could go over. Yeah, tuning heads, making sure your heads are in tune. Using lug locks so that they don't slip, having a reference so that, when I first start tracking drums, I'll record samples of each drum, like a lot of producers will do, right? Give me the snare 10 times, give me the tom 10 times. And I really don't use those that often. What I use those more than anything else is for tuning reference. So when we played a song, we've been playing for a few hours, or maybe less than that sometimes, I'll be like, okay, let me put the snare on loop and let me go and tune it. So I'll have the snare in my headphone, and I'll have the snare in front of me so I can kind of tune reference what the snare pitch is. So it's great. It's really good for like tuning references. And again, if there's like a weird hit, I'll replace it with one of those. But for the most part, especially with how meticulous we are with the Lorna Shore stuff, we'll get it right. It'd be very rare that there's a missed hit somewhere that we need to replace later on. No, we get it right when we're doing it. But for some other projects where it's like, well, the drummer's only going to be here for 3 days, it's like, oh, okay. Now we need to make sure that we have some extra samples on hand in case we forget something in the rush of trying to get, an album worth of songs done in 3 days. But trying to think if there's any other maybe mixing things. Yeah, like I said, you have cymbals and shells separate. It's going to be something that, I drive myself crazy when I'm mixing this shit, because in the case of Lorna, I don't know if there's another band out there. I would love somebody to show me another band that has more density to deal with in terms of the density of the drums, the density of the bass, the density of the guitar, the density of the production, the density of vocals. So there's so much going on, and I have to consider what the guitar is doing, what production is doing, what vocals are doing when I'm processing drums. You want the drums to sound good on their own, and I'll mix them on their own to sound good. But then how does that relate to everything else? And then on top of that, how does that relate to just the overall vibe of the record, the vibe of the song? I know there are some people that will complain about, like, there's a conversation about clarity in mixes that I understand it, but I also find it kind of funny. I don't really care to, I mean, obviously I care about clarity because there's a certain amount of, let's say when you're cooking a dish, oh, I want the rosemary to pop. I want this, I want the salt. I want this thing. I want that thing. But like, you put it in your mouth, this thing you're trying to cook. What is the overall vibe of it? What is the overall flavor you're trying to convey? That to me is the ultimate priority when I do a mix. Like, clarity is good and all, but I will absolutely throw clarity in the trash if that means I can get a certain vibe across of violence. You know what I'm saying? It's the same problem, and I've said this in other interviews too. I like a lot of horror films, and my favorite horror films they really play with your imagination, right? They're not concerned about clarity. We need to show you the bad guy. This is what the monster looks like. You've already, to me, like, erased and eroded the mystique and the mystery that makes the horror film truly horrific. Because when you only show a little bit of it and you only get a little glimpse of that, or a little sound of this, a little sound of that, when you're kind of confused by what's going on, it's scarier, right? Like, we as human beings are afraid of what we don't know, right? This is the cause of all kinds of problems in human society. I do a whole rant about that. But as it relates to horror, as it relates to a horror film, when you don't know what's going on and you think you know, and your imagination starts running wild, those to me are the best horror films of all time. I mean, to me, like, as a gamer, it's like Silent Hill is a great example of a game that, and a story, most importantly, that plays with your expectations, that plays with obscurity and not being forthcoming with what the narrative. If Silent Hill is very clear about what this person is supposed to do, what this represents, what that represents, it would fail. It would fail as a horror film. But because they're purposely obscure and it's not quite clear what's going on, that to me is what makes the mystery of it, what makes what kind of, you know what I mean? When you kind of hear, I'm not quite sure what the heck was that. That makes it interesting to me. So I'll listen to some like tech metal records, and they're very clearly mixed, and I appreciate them from a technical standpoint, both engineering wise and also musician wise. But for my heart, it doesn't do much at all. Because there is a certain pursuit of ridding one's art of anxieties that I find to be emotionally unsatisfying. So I will like to listen to a lot of technical metal that's very clearly mixed, and I just doesn't really do a whole lot for me. It does from the technical, from the engineering brain, but yeah, emotionally, I feel like sometimes there's a certain clarity chase that has sabotaged maybe some other emotional pursuit. But then again, maybe it wasn't there to begin with. Maybe that's all they have. But with a band like Lorna Shore, with a band like Signs of the Swarm, there is an overall emotional outpouring from, let's say, Adam's leads. There's a melodic side to them that's very much here, and then there's like a breakdown, which is just violence. And there's such a contrast between the two things that I think is like very valuable from an emotional standpoint. So that's kind of how I go about it. And again, to relate back to the drums, it all goes back to that. Like, how do the drums add aggression? How do the drums create a certain amount of violence? How do they highlight and help out the guitar, the production? How does the production help out the vocal? How does the guitar help out the melody? So these are all things I'm trying to balance when I think about how do I mix the drums, and how I will mix them for Lorna. Totally different than I'll mix them for Signs of the Swarm. Totally different than I'll mix them for Gush or Varials. It's always very much a case by case basis how I end up processing drums, and it's always informed by what is the song doing, what's the emotion, what's the vibe when I listen to it. When I try to, again, make the analogy of tasting the dish, if I just get a forkful of this, am I getting the picture? or are there too many inside jokes happening and it's being lost? You know what I mean? I'm too close to all of it. So sometimes I'll take days away from it and just try to come back to it with fresh ears and see where it's going with it all. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I could touch on in terms of drum mixing. It's a complex question because drums are the most complex instrument on a record, you know, in terms of technicality. Now, vocals would be the most complex in terms of emotional content, but drums are the most complex from a technical standpoint because, again, you have one snare drum, you might be dealing with 12, 20 lugs that you have to keep in tune, different heads, snare strainers, rims, hoops, all this kind of stuff, 2 mics, maybe 3, maybe more, and you're dealing with bleeding overheads and rooms. So from a technical standpoint, drums really occupy a lot of bandwidth in the technical and emotional energy of the engineer. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers all the drum stuff. If you have anything else that you want to add to that, that's fine.
When you should use drum samples and when you can mix metal drums without drum samples.
It's going to depend, I think, on the drummer and the sound that they're going for. I try, if it's a good drummer, I try to use as much of the live sound as we can, just because it's going to be unique that way. For like, I always laugh when I read comments like on the new Signs of the Swarm, just like, it's programmed drums. It's just like, it's all live drums. It's a trigger, but everything else is live. No samples on anything, no layering. So, yeah, with something like that, it just all depends on how you process it and how you record it. For me, it just really depends on the sound that you're after. If you want a big roomy sound, you either have to record in a big room or you can layer in room samples on top of it. Like for example, with Varials, with a hardcore band, to me, using reverb on drums is just, no, I just hate the way it sounds. And a tight drum sound like what I have in my drum room isn't quite it either. So what I end up doing for Varials is I'll make drum samples out of our kit in my garage. I like the way the garage sounds for shells. I don't want to record drums in my garage because then it becomes a bit of a washy mess with cymbals. So I just take the shells out there and I hit them. I get Sean to hit them. I record those sounds. I layer in not a close mic sound, but like a room mic sound on the live drums. And that way it puts it kind of in the garage without compromising the integrity of the close mic sounds and the actual performance that you're getting. Again, that's another Andy Wallace trick I learned over the years, him being my favorite mixer of all time. Another thing I'll do is I'll take like a sound wedge, like a live monitor wedge that I have. I'll put that in my garage and I'll run the shell channel, just the shells into my garage and then record the room that way. That's another way of doing it. To get like you're essentially reamping an ambience. And a third one that I've done comes from one of my other favorite engineers, Sylvia Massey. What she does sometimes is she'll take a snare and she'll put it on top of a monitor, chain side up, and then run the snare channel through it. And when you send a loud snare of the same frequency, the same tuning, it's kind of magical how it works. It's like reamping a snare drum, and it will like fire off the snare and the chains react just like they would if a drummer was playing it. It's kind of crazy. So sometimes I tried that a little bit on the new Tallah record. We did that on one of the songs. It sounded really cool. So to me, it's these are all creative tools. It's like, when do I use a drill versus when do I use a saw versus when do I use a vice grip? When do I use a screwdriver? It's going to depend on what I'm building, what we're trying to build creatively. So yeah, there's a million different ways to use samples or no samples. For me, generally though, if I'm doing a hardcore record, I don't want a whole lot of samples on it, but it depends what it is. Like is No Face, No Case? Are you familiar with this band?
No.
I want to say from Russia. Maybe they're not. Great band. They're just like a funny joke hardcore band. And all their songs are memes and things like that. So a band like that, you can use all the samples you want. I think it's fine. There's no pretense of integrity. But when you're doing a hardcore band, like to me, like Varials it has to sound real. It has to sound raw, right? There's a certain expectation. So you have to be aware of like, what genre are you working in? What's the expectation of what you're trying to do? And how does that sound? A lot of people think like, oh, I don't want to use samples, and you get very prideful about it. I get it. I'm also prideful about it, but I'm also pragmatic. I'm a realist. Does this sound good enough? Did I make mistakes along the way in terms of tuning, in terms of mic placement, in terms of maybe letting the drummer get away with something I should have cracked the whip on? So at the end, when I'm mixing, I'm like, did I make the right call? Can I make this work? Do I need to? I went into this thinking, yes, I don't want to use any samples, but maybe I do now. It depends. You know what I mean? There's a million different ways we could go about it, but
is it necessary to use parallel compression in metal mixes all the time, or you can mix metal songs on a good level without using parallel compression for the instruments and vocals?
Yeah, I mean, this is art, right? You don't have to use any parallel. You can make a record without any compression, none. You don't have to. People think they have to because there's certain expectations of sounds. No, you don't have to at all. It's all, for me at least, I like the sound of parallel compression. I like the sound of how aggressive and crazy it sounds. For the right bands, for other bands I work with, no. But if I work with a band, especially like Signs of the Swarm, and especially Lorna Shore, and New Varials as well, I talk to the people in the band, like, what records do you like the sound of? What are things, oh, you like the sound of this, Knock Loose, or you like the sound of the new Whitechapel, or we'll talk about some records that have come out either recently or old ones, and it's just like, oh, you like a lot of records from this era of the 90s. It's like, okay, I know that they would use this type of miking technique or this type of amp or this type of whatever. So I try to have a lot of conversation with the people I work with, and that informs me how aggressive I need to get with compression. Because I love all of it. I love shitty sounding black metal records. I love really like smooth, natural sounding jazz records. I love all of it. I really do. The only things I don't like when it comes to music are things that feel not genuine. When I listen to a record and it feels like these people are just using the latest plugins and are trend hopping on whatever the latest trend is. And I can hear it in the writing of the music. I can hear it in the mixing. I can hear it in the plugins. And I turn it off instantly. It doesn't feel genuine to me. So for me, being genuine is, again, it's another one of these philosophies I try to use to inform my decisions on everything I do. So does the band like a ton of compression? Do they like it when I just completely demolish the mix while we're working on things? If we're tracking a breakdown and I just crank the compression into the master and I get a great reaction from everybody, then that tells me, okay, this is the right course. If I do that and they laugh and like, oh, that's a little ridiculous, that's okay, I'll back it off. So I try a bunch of different things to see what gets a reaction of the people I'm working with. To me, it's like, in a lot of ways, it's like a band that performs live. If you're in a band, and Alexi, have you played in some bands live?
Back in the days, I tried to create my own metal band back in Siberia, and it was like in 2005. So I have like very little experience.
You have some experience.
Yeah.
You have some experience. So when you write a song and you play live, like, oh, I can't wait to play this song live. And you play it live and you're like, oh, that didn't go over as well as I thought it would, right? It feels slow. It feels like this part goes on too long, right? You're familiar with that feeling, right? Or like a song that you thought was, oh, this is simple. And then you play it live. Oh, wow, we got a good reaction to the song I didn't think we'd get a good reaction to. I've played tons live. I've played in tons of different bands. I've been on tours. I've signed to a record label. I know what that side of the experience is like for Ben. And I use that when I'm doing mixing. I like mixing with bands there because to me, it's like performing live in front of people. Like, oh, let me turn this up. Oh, everyone likes that? Okay. So I'm kind of employing that same technique that a live musician does in front of an audience, except my audience is the band members, right? So I will do, parallel compression. You like that? Yeah. No. Okay. Sure. You know what I mean? To me, it's about creative mixing and doing a mix that the band feels excited about, because if the band feels excited about it, then they will continue that energy and excitement into making videos. playing live, then the album will get the proper support from the people that matters the most. Because a lot of people who mix records, like, we need the support from the casual listeners. Don't mix for them. Don't do that. I mean, you obviously have to have some consideration, but like, the band members are the most important critiques of your mix, and nobody else even matters comparatively. Mix for them, make sure they are happy with it. And if they're happy with it, the fans like the band because of what they wrote to begin with. They never, you know what I mean? Lorna Shore didn't start off by the fans coming together. See, we're going to be a bunch of fans of a band that doesn't exist. What should we have them write? That never has ever happened, right? The band comes first. So do what makes them happy. If that's a ton of parallel compression, great. If they want no compressions, like, we want to make an album that has zero compression, we're anything that we need to do for level volume, we'll either automate or we will fix it with performances. Cool. I'd be down to do a record like that. So to me, it's all about what do the artists want and how can I help them along that way and inform them. Because if an artist seriously came to me with that, I'd be like, cool, then I'm going to be very diligent about our performances and getting levels to begin with that will help us achieve that goal without, compression.
My next question is, what gear do you use for tracking extreme vocals, like for Lorna Shore? And what tips can you give on recording extreme vocals in general?
I use, there's been a long trend of using an SM7B. So Jake from In Heart's Wake was here one time, and he's like, I want to hold a SM7B, but I don't like all the stand junk that gets in the way. So he convinced me to buy an angle grinder, and I took it to my 7B and chopped off all the unnecessary bits. So now I have a handheld 7B. Hold on one second. Let me get to grab it. So yeah, the 7B is classic, right? So this is a modified 7B that I like to use. We use this on the new Lorna Shore record. It's just a little easier to hold in the hand without the stand on it. So I just use a little clamp on it so you can like plug it in and just hold it. We used it on the new Signs of the Swarm record as well. But a 7B is really clear and it's great, but it's not good for every album. We started using this mic also on the new Varials record, and it just sounded too clear. I went back to an old handheld mic that I first bought for my band way back in the day. Used it on, what did I use it on? The first For Today record. I used it on the Pale Horse Legend record, and the first two Varials records, I used it on those as well. And once we like plugged in that old mic, we're like, that's the Varials sound. That's you know what I mean? And it was like considerably less clear than a 7B, but clarity isn't always the answer. There's sometimes a certain vibe, a certain sound, a certain, like this sounds clear, whereas like the other mic sounds like a show. When you go to a show and a vocalist is using like a 57 or a 58, there's a certain like mushing of the voice when you hold a mic right there. That just sounds cool. It just sounds like a live show. And sometimes that's what you want. If I was recording, I don't know, Ariana Grande, would I use a handheld like that? No, probably not. So it depends on what type of band you're working with and what's the sound that you're going for. The new Tallah, for example, we tried a ton of different mics. The mic that Justin liked the most was an SM57 with a sock on the end of it with a rubber band around it. And because he ended up recording that whole album in one take, that's a whole crazy story. Yeah, the new Tallah record, the whole album, one entire take, no break, the whole thing, which is, I've never seen that done before. But really the secret to something like that is a ton of practice, having a really damn good vocalist. But also we spent a lot of time making sure the session was set up so that he could do the whole record start to finish. And he's not using a click track because we didn't use a click track for that record either. So we had to make sure we knew where like cues. I gave him a few cues in his headphones that we set up in advance so we could make sure that he knew what was coming if there was a break or a long pause. So he knew to come back in on time. So it was a little tricky. Again, like doing the drums, shells, and cymbals separate. If you're doing some kind of difficult process, you really want to make sure you're doing proper setup ahead of time so that you can set yourself up when you hit record. There's not going to be a ton of distraction. You know exactly what you need to do. So with vocals, yeah. So the 7B, yeah, it's common. We used, again, Signs of the Swarm for like David's vocals. Amazing. You know what I mean? For Will's vocals, that's what he uses at home. He likes the sound of a 7B. He's comfortable with it. It's like an instrument for a vocalist, right? Like if you're used to the sound of a Telecaster and that's what you play on, You grab someone's, let's say a Les Paul, a Gibson Les Paul, and you put it into the same pedal chain, it is not going to behave the same way at all. It's going to change. Oh, it's like all of a sudden this sounds very stuffy and very like boomy, whereas like a Telecaster is very thin, right? So you're going to EQ everything totally different. Same thing with vocals. If you're used to like Will and Dave from Signs of the Swarm, they both have 7Bs at home. That's, I mean, for Amongst the Low and Empty, that album, I believe I used David's mic. He brought his mic along because it's even more his, right? So you're used to the sound, you're used to the way your vocals react to it. And so that's what I'll go with. But for other bands, we'll try some different things. But then I run into a Neve. I just like the Neve 1073. I like the saturation of it. To me, it's nostalgic. There's a certain classic breakup overdrive about it that I just really like. I like to drive it. I like to drive those preamps hard because as a poor kid, and if I don't see lights going up, I don't feel like I'm getting my money's worth out of my compressor. So I want to see needles moving. I want to see lights lighting up. So I usually like to drive the 1073 pretty hard. I put it through a distressor. I'll, oftentimes crank it pretty hard. I like to get the sound of the preamp, the physical preamp, the physical compressor as close to final as possible. So again, when you're doing vocals, it sounds like final coming through your headphones. So again, there's no surprises because if you're a vocalist and a lot of compression makes the vocals typically in heavy music sound really good, you're going to play into that a little bit differently. You know what I'm saying? Like the quiet parts, you might feel have to be louder because there's no compression on it. So if you have compression, like final compression on your headphone mix while you're performing, you'll hear it right away. Is that I can be quieter and it has me. I don't have to worry about, and this is the same philosophy I use for drums, for guitar and everything too. I like to make sure it sounds good in the performer's headphones or in their monitors or wherever. So you know what you're getting into and you can perform into what should be the final tone. Yeah, with the new Lorna Shore, I don't think I'm using any plugins on any of the vocals. It's all done on the way in. So Will knows exactly what he needs to do. So vocals are very psychological. Getting a vocalist comfortable, again, making sure lyrics and sounds, that's also very important. What looks good on paper, I work very hands-on with vocalists like Will, like David, to make sure that vocal phrasings and patterns meet the music nicely, to make sure that vowels sound good. What looks good on that page when you write it out, oh, that's a great line, and then you scream it, I'm like, oh, that O sounds bad, or that E, ooh, like what these are tones, these are like guitars, these are like chords and chugs and single notes, right? It's the same type of thing when you think about vocals. Your different consonants, your different vowels, you're essentially shaping riffs and sounds with your voice. So while lyrics are very important, the shapes and sounds and patterns of the things that you're making with your voice as an instrument sometimes are more important than the lyrics themselves, right? Because most people, when they even the most diehard metal fans, they'll put on a record from Signs of the Swarm or Lorna, you'll understand maybe 20% of the vocals at best. So that tells me the phrasings need to be good, the patterns need to be good, the tone needs to be good, kind of first and foremost. If you got great lyrics, but they just don't sound good as you scream them, we got to rework some stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Is it necessary to saturate extreme vocals in a metal mix? And what is the difference on using distortion and saturation for metal vocals in a metal mix?
Saturation is just kind of, I don't know, it just kind of gives the whole thing an overall more pleasant, finished tone, I suppose. It just brings out subtle harmonics. It's just more pleasing to the ear with a nice preamp. And I'll saturate pretty heavy, and it kind of sometimes crosses the line with the way I like to saturate with my Neve into distortion to some degree. But for the most part, I try to avoid overt distortion with my preamps. So it just kind of levels things out. It gives it a nice warmth and clarity. The Neve has a lot of just natural top end to it that I do like a lot. Distortion for me is more of an effect. And some bands, like, I love the band Advent, for example. They're like an older hardcore band. their vocals were just heavily distorted. And I did a poured out record, and they were like super influenced by Advent. So we used a ton of distortion on the vocals. I like a rat pedal. Like, to me, a rat pedal's classic on a vocal. That's just a great distortion. I use that thing on like kick drums. I use it on all kinds of shit. But yeah, distortion to me is more of a creative. It leans more towards the creativity side of, we are adding a specific effect, whereas a preamp is kind of a baseline thing to improve the overall tone of the vocals. That's how I would distinguish the two.
What is the difference, in your opinion, on mastering a metal mix in the same project in a mixing session and using a pro master engineer for the final metal mix mastering?
I mean, I do pretty much all of the mastering. I have for the longest time. The reason I do the mastering is just because, again, I got into this because I couldn't afford to. So if I can't afford studio time, I definitely can't afford to mix, and I definitely can't afford to master. And I never really thought about it as different processes, honestly, for years. Even after I had done label work, I mastered my first album, and that went out to like all the usual distribution places like Best Buy and Hot Topic and Amazon and all the. I guess I mastered it. I just wanted it to be loud. I wanted it to sound like other records. I had no clue what the technical term of mastering was back then, but I know it needed to be loud. It just needed to sound good. So, and it needed to sound consistent from song to song. So for me, I try not to think of these two things as separate processes too much. I like things just to sound good as quickly as possible when I'm working with the band, so that we're not guessing while we're working on a record. Because I think a lot of people do that. They'll be like, we're just recording now, we're not mixing, we're just doing this now. And I understand keeping those things separate, because you can go down rabbit holes. Like, you record a guitar part and now the engineer's mixing it for the next 2 hours. That can stunt productivity, and I try to avoid that. But I do mix little bit as I go. Especially in the mornings, if I'm doing drum edits before the band shows up. That's where I get a lot of mixing done on my own. I try to do that as much on my own as possible for obvious things. And then for more like creative things, I like to show the band stuff. If it's going to take a while, again, I'll do that on my own and then present. And then the band shows up the next day. How do you feel about the mix today? Oh, yeah, it sounds better. Oh, yeah, maybe it's a little crazy. Maybe it was better the other day. But mastering, yeah, I had someone else, just as a test, we had someone else master one of my songs recently. And I was just like, oh, crap, I didn't really spend a whole lot of time mastering it. And we sent it to like an actually good mastering engineer, came back sounding just about the same. So it's just, it's one of those things. It's just part of my process to, and I do mastering for other bands. I find it great. It's easy for me. I find it's the easiest part of the process is the mastering. As long as the mix is good. If the mix is good, mastering is easy. Yeah, I've only had my work mastered, honestly, 2 or 3 times in like the 20 years I've been doing this. But it's cool. It's an interesting perspective to get on it. If you're not used to it and you'd rather just mix without the freedom of mastering, I get that. I totally understand that, because mastering now brings in the problem of consistency, and also comparing to other records and trying to be as loud as other records and trying to be as full in the low end or high end as other records. Whereas like if you're mixing with the thought of sending it to somebody else, I think there's more like freedom in that. And I understand the desire from a lot of mixing engineers. There are days where I'm like, I wish I could just send this to someone else for mastering. It would make my job easier in some respect, but also, I don't know. I do like to know what it's going to sound like after mastering. I don't want there to be like, oh, wow, we should have turned the vocals way up. I don't want to have that, because that happened to me in the past, actually. When I first got started out, it was my first mixing job for Victory Records back in the day. I did a Beneath the Sky record. I remember hearing the master back, and I was like, shit. I should have turned and now I feel like the vocals are too quiet, probably because the mastering engineer was using stereo widening on it, right? So now the middle starts to lose, and now, the vocals sound a little quiet. So I'm just like, yo, can I get you another, let me just get you another mix of the vocals up. And I remember the mastering engineer was like, no, I'll just fix it in the master. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't think that's the right approach. But I wasn't the pro back then. This person who did the mastering has done a ton of other stuff. And honestly, probably could have fixed it. Maybe they just said, maybe I just went a little too crazy with the stereo widening, and he kind of narrowed it down. I still think the vocals are a little too quiet, but that's, you know what I mean? It's whatever. It was one of those learning moments where I'm like, I just know that if I rely on myself to do this, there'll be less, problems. It's funny doing all the stuff that I do, from the engineering, mixing, mastering, production, co-writing, arrangements, all of these things. One of the reasons I enjoy it, and the longer I'm in this business, the more I'm understanding why other bands also enjoy this process. There's so many hands in the pot sometimes, and there can be so many communication problems trying to, we got to get the engineering person on the phone, because how hard it is to get even just this arrangement of a podcast. You have stuff going on, I got stuff going on, we have different time zones going on, right? So imagine now working on a record where you had, let's say, 2 engineers doing engineering in terms of drum setup, drum tech, guitar tech. Let's say you just have 2. And then you have a producer involved. And then maybe you have a secondary producer that worked on some other songs. And now you have a mixing engineer, maybe somebody else. And let's say there's a problem, you know what I mean? Like, you have so many people, you're trying to coordinate so many different things. It can be a real pain to try and get all these people on the same page to say, hey, I want to change this one thing. Well, now you got to talk to this guy's manager to talk to, it's a nightmare. So for me, it's one of the reasons why I really do enjoy doing all of it. It makes it simpler on me. It makes it simpler on the band, so that when the bassist says, hey, I wish my little run came out in the chorus a little bit more. Hey, I'm the engineer. I helped you set up your bass. I helped you set up your tone. I'm mixing it. I'm also mastering it. I got you. I know where I can go into the session and fix that for you. As opposed to say, well, the mastering, we got the master back and now this is the way it is. So now we're going to go back to the mixing engineer and tell them to raise up, then send it back to the mastering engineer to fix it. It can be a nightmare. And I hate that stuff. It's just, that is the biggest reason for me to want and desire to do this as much by myself as possible. I don't have any, I'll have an occasional person I'll call in an emergency situation that's like, yo, things went south. I need someone to edit drums for the next few days, and I'll call somebody. But that's very rare. It's only happened on maybe 3 or 4 occasions in my entire life. I try to do as much of it on my own as possible. Just to keep everything simple for the band, because the longer you're in this industry, the more you realize there's a lot of just life messes that happen along the way. And again, if you're a young engineer and you're listening to this podcast, you have a lot of hopes and dreams and a lot of ideals about how records are made. I've never had any of those. To me, it's always just been, what's the practicality? How do I get this done given the circumstances? Oh, we got 3 days to make a record? Hey, I've done that before. That's fine. Oh, we have 18 weeks to make a record? Okay, sure. So every album is going to be different, and you have to be very flexible. You have to just pivot. You can't have this is the way I'm going to do it, and that's that. It's crazy. Just having conversations with other bands recently about stubborn producers that just demand their own way and just sabotage what so many producers would see as a dream opportunity is crazy to me. It's kind of nuts. So, the mastering thing really is just one of those. It's indicative of just an overall philosophy to me of, I just want to have control over all of it. Not so much as a control freak, but just as a way to simplify the whole process. If you can make a movie, let's say, if a director could also do the sound design and also do the script and also Quentin Tarantino is one of my favorite directors, and he does more than most, right? He does the script writing. He will pick a lot of the songs for the soundtrack. He'll direct it. He works very closely with a lot of people. So I find myself gravitating more towards that, because to me, that's where artistic vision comes into play. If I have a very clear idea of what the artistic direction is of this record, and I know how to execute it, I don't need another mastering engineer to put their spin on it. Sure, it'll be a different take on it, and that's fine. it won't be better or worse, in my opinion. Like, you can master an album literally a million different ways, right? You can have a little more bass. You can have a little more presence. You can have stereo width. You could have, you could saturate it more. You could do a million different ways. None of those would be wrong if the band is down for it, right? So for me, there's a bunch of different ways I can personally do it. And if that saves hassle and headache for the band in terms of the album process, that's worth more than a master that might sound even slightly better through somebody else. You know what I'm saying? So there's some practicality. It's not all about just the sound of things. There is a facilitating of the rickety machinery of making an album that you have to consider when you're a producer, right? So, because when I say I'm a producer, that means when Century Media says we need an album by this date, and I'm like, okay, here's the album. What does that all entail? That entails mastering, that entails engineering, that entails talking people off of ledges, that entails all kinds of things along the way. And yeah, for me, mastering is just one more step along the way to get things done. Like the new Varials record, for example, that I just finished, I mixed that, mastered that with the band here. So when they left the studio, it was done. We just recently had a call about the mix. I'm like, anything you want to change on it? And everyone's like, nope. All right, cool. So it's done. I like that. I like being able to finish it with the band there. So we're all in the same room and we can all finish it. So doing mix notes via email or like a call like this, it's just not as good. It's best to have someone there in person so you can hear it and say, hey, I want the lead up. And I turn it up and they're like, oh, now that clashes with something else. Okay, turn it back down. Whereas if you did that through email, that could be days of time. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, mastering is something that, again, for somebody that's not used to mastering, you want the creative freedom of infinite headroom to work with on a mix. I totally understand how somebody would love that creative process, because I think about that some days. I'm like, I wish I had the freedom to not have to also crack the whip from the mastering engineer side of things and say, yo, buddy, you're getting out of control in your mix. I got to master that now. So you got to be careful. So I have that conversation with myself. Whereas if you're just mixing something, you don't got to worry about loudness, right? Like that's up to the mastering engineer. That's your problem, buddy. Once I hand this off to you, now that's your problem. So now when the band says, hey, this isn't loud enough, as a mixing engineer, I can say, hey, I'm out of the conversation. So the conversation starts and ends with me. It's a lot of responsibility. But I like it. I like it because it is a interesting and complex creative problem to solve. So when I'm mixing vocals and I'm mastering the whole thing, I know what the vocal chain was. I know what the drums are doing. I know what the bass is doing. I know what the production is doing. And I think that could be a problem maybe for a lot of people. And just because I know it's been a problem for me in the past, you can't have a neutral perspective on things. But the older I get, the more I'm like, you know what? I don't really care about a neutral perspective. The weird bias, the weird petri dish of making that album, I think there's something special about that. And I think having what's the word I'm looking for? Almost a hired gun, an assassin to do your mastering. There is some value in that, but you're also not invested in the process. You also didn't have those one-on-one heart-to-heart conversations with somebody, with a guitarist about maybe not being happy with their guitar tone. You know what I mean? You're not as invested in this piece of art as the neutral mastering engineer. So the older I get, the more I feel inclined to indulge in the emotional investment of it. Yeah, sure. Maybe you get a slightly better mastering from a third party, but to get somebody that's in the trenches there with you, I like that. I like being in the trenches with the band. I think it's a part of the culture of that particular record. It's a bit of the time capsule that was us making that record. So yeah, I think it's valuable. But that's my philosophy. If somebody wants to hire a mastering engineer, trust me, there are many days I'm going to be thinking about this exact interview. I'll be sitting there working on a mix being like, I wish I could send this to somebody else.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schroeder, for such a wonderful interview. And thank you so much for all of your very knowledgeable and very educational mixing courses on the mix. It's a huge honor talking to you, and it's a huge privilege to learn from you. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Alexei. I appreciate you being patient with my scheduling, and I appreciate your great questions. Hey, you didn't ask me a pinball question.
Oh, yes. What do you like most about pinball?
What do I like most about pinball? I like, as a video game player, I like that it's a physical object. I've always loved video games, and there's a certain reaction time to it. It's like a video game, but like a physical embodiment of it. There's a lot of complex rules. Pinball was one of those things. When I was a kid, I'd play Street Fighter at the arcades. I'd play Mortal Kombat at the arcades because it made sense. I'm this guy. I got to kill this guy. I got to rip this guy's head off. I love it. That's great. I put it in my quarter, and I know what I'm supposed to do. With pinball, it didn't make sense. Not until I was like older. And like I said, it was around COVID that I really started looking into pinball. And I'm like, oh, there's so much more to this than I realized. There's strategies. There's techniques. It's like skateboarding, where if to a novice, skateboarding is like, you just get on the board and you don't fall off. Okay, that's the first step, right? But a real skateboarder is going to know there's a bunch of different tricks along the way. There's a million different tricks. You play Tony Hawk, you know what I'm talking about. There's half pipes, there's quarter pipes, there's rail tricks, there's street versus vert. There's so many different things you can get into. There's a whole world. Pinball's the same way. There's so much to it. It's so complex, and it continues to kind of like delight and surprise me. It's great. I encourage anybody listening to this to get to play some pinball. It's awesome. If you like games in any way, you'll enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schroeder, once again for such a wonderful interview. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience on Nails the Mix. Again, it's a huge privilege to learn from you. And I'm going now through all of your Nails the Mix mixing courses to expand my knowledge and to develop my mixing skills. And I'm learning much from your session. So thank you so much for everything. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for being a great interviewer.